Buonasera, benvenuti a questo incontro.
Good evening. Welcome to this meeting on the situation of the Italian economic system, its resources, and its current and potential attraction points. We have a first part with two speeches that will talk about the system of small and medium enterprises in our country, and then we'll talk about investments in economic growth. Then there will be a dialogue with Minister Giovanni Tria. I would like to welcome him here and thank him for being here tonight. So, my welcome to Alberto Brugnoli, Professor of Applied Economics in the University of Bergamo and Scientific Director of the Foundation Subsidiarity, and Fabrizio Palermo, CEO and General Director of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti. So let's start with the report of the Subsidiarity Foundation on the contribution of SMEs to development and research carried out with associations and universities. So we'll start straight away with my first question to Alberto Brugnoli. What are the main challenges that the Italian economic system has to face today? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening to Mr. Minister. So I will be very, very brief in my reply. Our observatory shows that there are a few phenomena that are important at international level, and as well as some specific elements of the national contests. So there are four main challenges at a global level that can be summarized as follows. The first challenge is the change of the anthropological framework with a crisis of what the fundamental values of coexistence are. The second challenge is linked with environmental sustainability, and we normally talk about green economy in this case. And the main driver here is given by energy transition processes. Decarbonization, that's what we call it. These are processes that lead to the fact that carbon, oil and gas and fossil fuels in general are abandoned in favor of renewable energies. Then there is a third main challenge, the effects of ICT, big data and intelligent systems, what we call digitalization, that has great impact on the new forms of territorial organization that are extremely interesting and important, the so-called smart cities or smart land. Then there is a fourth challenge at international level, that is to say the demographic dynamics. Population is growing, the level of education is higher, life expectancy is growing, and so obviously there are all the issues linked with active aging, new needs, and as well as problems linked with migration flows. This is the global situation. Now, in the national context, some of these challenges are made even more difficult to overcome by some characteristics that are typically Italian from the demographic point of view. The fact that the natality has actually decreased, and this has a strong impact on our country. From an economic point of view, the low productivity of our system, because we are now lagging behind, and then there is unemployment among young people in southern Italy especially, and then from the financial point of view, the variables of public finances, the GDP debt relationship and all the controversies about that. And from the political and institutional point of view, a detachment, so to speak, between the political and institutional level and the economic reality. Then, from the social point of view, a difference between real data and what is perceived by the Italian population. And this gap is becoming wider and wider. We talked about this here with the president of Instant and the president of Ipsos. And this gap between what is real and what is perceived is really significant. So, well, we can go back to the public finance unbalance. So, what is the situation of our enterprises facing these challenges? Well, we have focused our reflections with our colleagues in this report within the framework of sustainable development. We cannot talk about development. We have only to talk about sustainable development. The UN Agenda for 2030 has fixed some goals for 2030, the 17 sustainable development objectives for all. And here we have to talk about different systems. We think about sustainable growth, and here, well, I have to quote because I think this is particularly relevant. This is a definition that was given in our Common Future report, the Brundtland report of 1987, that says sustainable development is that development that satisfies the needs of present generations without compromising the needs of future generations. So this is the definition of sustainable development that we like, because it focuses on the needs of people. So people are at the heart of sustainable development, and it takes into account all generations without leaving anyone behind. So somehow we believe that we can look at sustainable development as a new way to what we call common good since Aristoteles. So, but then obviously every culture has its own definitions. Anyway, sustainable development is a terrain on which we can all have a dialogue, and this is really relevant. So in this framework, just 2 minutes to say that SMEs and intermediate corporations are the key actors to bring their own territories along paths that aim at sustainable development. Some figures of the European Commission in Europe: SMEs are about 23,850,000, 89.5% of the enterprises give work to 93 million of employees. 99.9% of the enterprises outside the financial sector have 13 million employees. They have overcome the great crisis of 2008, but they are following different models and different development paths. They have different levels of livelihood, and there are 2 criteria mainly: the territory where they are based and their resources, their expertise and their skills. So, well, productivity within the sector is very varied, and when we want to think about policies, we need to take this into account. The role of medium enterprises within SMEs is extremely relevant in a framework of sustainable development. In Italy, they play a very important role because they are the catalyzers of big enterprises, and also because they are the result of the cooperation of hundreds of small enterprises that make their own products and have their own exports. And then territorial models, sustainable developments, and SMEs. There are three main territorial models in Italy at the moment. So we need to think that there are three different models. First, we have widespread industrialization areas. So these are the areas that were born from our industrial districts. The second model is that of urban systems, which is extremely relevant, but it is completely different from widespread industrialization areas. And then we have areas with a high cultural and environmental value. The three models are different, these three models, and we need to bear these differences in mind. This is my last question in terms of policies in Italy. What are the priorities? Well, we have identified at a horizontal level, these elements are all horizontal elements that you can find in the 12 chapters of this report. We identified some investments that are urgent, that are the six capitals of all territorial systems. First, investments on human resources, on human capital, in terms of skills of young people, and then social capital with reference to the most important stakeholders in the region, then the economic and financial capital to favor access to credit and the economic functions and debureaucratization. Infrastructural capital, that is to say connectivity, logistics, and transport, and then the cultural and agricultural heritage, and the institutional capital. So horizontally, then obviously there has to be research and development applied to all the relevant themes. These are the policies. Four are the priorities. The first is promoting subsidiary culture. We think that this country should really promote this kind of culture, the whole continent, not only just Italy, because subsidiary culture favors the involvement and participation of all the stakeholders in the society. It offers good motivation to pursue sustainable development, taking into account the fundamental needs of everyone. It favors cooperation, inclusion, solidarity. It reduces inequalities and conflicts between the different stakeholders, and makes it possible to carry out the best strategies in terms of policies, both at vertical level and at horizontal level, involving all the actors. To promote subsidiary culture means to promote also these intermediate actors that play an important role that nobody else can play. They offer services for sustainable development. They have also a representative function, but they help educating the needs of individuals, channeling them towards the common good. So by promoting this culture, we need to help and support what we can call systemic actors, those who know how to look at sustainable development as an horizon. There are private actors, there are public actors, there are single actors and groups of actors. They can aggregate financial and human resources and take a path that go towards sustainable development. So we need to promote these actors. And I conclude with other three priorities. So to promote a subsidiary culture, that's the first priority. Then to promote young people, young SMEs, particularly through the connection between education, training, and work. And here I quote one of the OECD report lines. The education of a child that starts school in 2008, so he will finish his school years in 2031. How can this prepare this child to work in jobs that do not even exist at the moment, technologies that are not even there, and to solve problems that we cannot even imagine at the moment, because this is what technological evolution is doing at the moment. So when we think about education and training, we need to think about that. Those who study today, who go to school today, do not know what is awaiting them in the future. They don't know what kind of work they will be doing, what are the technologies that will be available. So it is important to grant and well, this is a cultural issue, the education value of work and apprenticeship. Third priority, I'm not going to talk about innovative startups because I don't have the time. Third priority, SMEs, cooperation and internationalization. This is really a very important note for the development of the country. And then with the fourth priority, since we have Mr. Palermo here with us, the importance to have access to credit. Italian and non-Italian SMEs could find financing only from bank loans that obviously have credit conditions that are more difficult than those of bigger enterprises. So we needed to start bank business models that are new, with new elements like consultants that can help SMEs to find new financing solution in a market that is now dominated by digitalization. And then there have to be also non-banking financing. We need to think about a rebalancing of the structure of enterprises, new channels of access to credit, and we look with great interest at Cassa Depositi President, what it will be doing in the future as an actor in the territory.
Grazie per la capacità di sintesi.
Thank you for giving us a very clear summary. Well, the role and the expectations of the Deposits and Loans Fund have already been described. This is controlled by the Ministry of Finance, 83%, and 16% by banking foundations. And we have the postal scheme and also another financial scheme that are our main activities. There is something weird in the perception. We've said before that the gap between reality and perception is quite big in Italy. And this is a kind of thing that also applies to the Deposits and Loans Fund, because it looks like it is a rescue system whenever there is a problem. But you have a 3-year plan with 200 billion investment involved. Well, that's very coherent and consistent. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I would like also to greet the minister. The Deposits and Loans Fund, as you said, is suffering from this anomaly. That is, it is perceived, especially by the press, by the media, as a subject that takes action during problematic situations. However, it consists of the Ministry of Finance and the banking system as the main stakeholders. And it's been on for many, many years, and it's very close to the community. It was established as a way to collect resources through postal schemes, so that these can then be used in daily life through financing schools, and motorways, and ways, and hospitals, and everything that relates to everyday life in the community. This was the initial aim, which evolved, of course, considering the evolution of the economic context too. But it is still a financial institution that is very close to the community. I would like to give you some figures. We have 430 billion consolidated active, and we have 250 billion postal investments, and we have 26 million clients. And we are very careful with the financial and economic return in all the investments. And we also consider sustainability, which is at the core of our institution, because we want to take care of development support in our country. And that's what we have done with ever more attention, greater attention to closeness to the community. We want to favor communities. And we have widened this to the world of enterprises and infrastructures. Basically, our fund is a tool that supports everyday life activities. We have now a digital kind of scheme, not a paper-based scheme with postal investment, but this is a tool that can help people invest in everyday life activities. And we finance electrical and gas infrastructure, schools. We finance schools every 2 days. So we finance education, and I really agree with all the themes that were mentioned before, because the circular layout is part of our fund, and it operates also on the market with a private-looking fashion. What are the characteristics of your investment? Sometimes investments are given across the board, and sometimes no investments are granted. What is the most efficient system? Well, we approved our industrial plan in last December. We have 4 main lines. Enterprises, that means supporting 3 different areas. First of all, innovation. We are the main financer of venture capital in Italy, and it's not a question of the resources that are made available, but it is about the link between innovation and industrial sectors. Because if innovation doesn't have an industrial result, then there is no growth. And we can do this because we have 30 billion portfolio stakes since we are part of the Treasury. We invest in more than 500 companies in any sector. And through this contact, we can boost innovation in our view. Then growth, both domestic and international growth. Domestic growth means investing in supply chains and supporting big companies, and also international investments. We support the supply chain of exports, for example, with Sach and Siemens. And this is a way to give a great boost to companies, not just big companies, but also small companies. And we are going back to the communities, because our fund was very present in Rome, but not in the rest of Italy. The logic here is not a banking logic. It wants to be a selective logic, so that there can be a physical and a digital channel that are used. This has been renewed recently, and it is available to all the companies. And the last point is access to credit. We work with the banking systems. We done an agreement a few weeks ago about this, because we do believe in diversification. And we want to rely a lot on the banking system to favor small and medium companies to have access to the credit. And then we are present as not just a financing subject, but we also created an internal unit supporting public and private subjects in establishing projects. For example, for engineers, we've created a support package for the financial part, and not just the financial part for that. And we support public administrations, and in all the projects that are often linked to sustainability, renewable energy. We worked with many companies launching initiatives. And then the other aspect is international cooperation, which is a recent activity. It started 2 years ago. On the one hand, we managed a fund from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for cooperation, and then we allotted our own resources to finance projects that are often promoted by Italian companies in developing countries to promote development through sustainability, not just in Italy, but also in the countries abroad. And the last point is that we work with the companies of the group. And we do this to create a kind of system. We are a big stakeholder, and making these companies work together means creating big opportunities for the companies, but also for the network of suppliers that work in close proximity with those companies. And many initiatives have started, for example, with Eni and very, very big companies. And so we established links with the companies, investing in them, for example, for waste recovery. You mentioned international cooperation in other countries, such as France and Germany. There are institutions that have a similar role. Do you work together with them? Because there are many internationalized companies, especially at a European level. Yes, absolutely. We collaborate a lot with the similar partner institutions in Germany, in France, but also, for example, we collaborate with similar institutions in countries such as Tunisia, where we did a project about money transfer, connecting our systems with their systems and allowing a greater flow of resources with that country to create development at the local level. I insist on this because this is international cooperation, but we tried to develop projects together, but we want to promote Italian development. Please remember that we are an Italian institution whose main priority is to promote development in Italy with a market logic. Last question. Italy is a manufacturing country, is a country where tourism is very important in the fashion industry and the food and beverage industry. Do you have priorities in your investments, or do you simply respond to requests? As of today, we do assess investments on the basis of priority. We are present already in some sectors, and often we work in close collaboration with companies that are already part of our group, and our presence today is quite varied already. For tourism, there's TH, for example, with which we collaborate, and we are launching an initiative of education for that. And we are doing the same with industries, with the industrial companies of the group, because we have this kind of collaboration when we also collaborate with companies outside our group. For example, we started a collaboration with the whole supply chain of defense systems with Leonardo. We're investing a lot in this because we consider this sector of excellency. We collaborate with the Treasury too, and then there's guidelines that our board of directors give us. Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Palermo. Thank you, Alberto Brugnoli. And now I would like to invite the minister to join us on the podium. Thank you.
Grazie di nuovo.
So thanks again, Mr. President, Mr. Minister, for being here tonight. And I would like to ask what do you think about what you just heard. We thought about the backbone of our country, the SMEs. We talked about important investments, because obviously without investment there is no growth, and we do need to grow. Yes, I have to say that I have listened with a great interest to the first intervention, the importance of SMEs, and this idea to, let's say, go back to an idea of subsidiarity. I do think this is extremely important, and this idea has to be rethought and to be placed in the modern world that is characterized by advanced processes of globalization, which in turn are characterized by hyperconnectivity. So what does this mean? Well, this means that a small enterprise, and I'm not talking about medium enterprises, can be globally connected in a very easy way. So hyperconnectivity generates a lot of public benefits. It's something positive also in financial terms. Let's think about fintech, but it also generates inequality. A small enterprise can be connected to the global world and take advantage of this opportunity. And this is something good, positive. But at the same time, this means that the small enterprise does not need its own territory anymore. So we talked about the role of intermediate actors before, but we need to understand what is happening through this process in terms of intermediation, because this has a great effect on companies. It creates weak connections between people and enterprises at a global level too, and it actually breaks the strong connections that were at the basis of our societies. So what does this mean? This means that we need to recreate all this, but we have to do it keeping in mind the global situation. So we have to think policies that start at a local level, but that also go global, because these are the two main elements. Otherwise, we might have complications in trying to pursue the right objectives that were mentioned before. So we talked about investments with private resources. You have always said that it is important to have public investments. So this is often seen as a contradiction, because, well, that's what has been said. We need to increase the deficit in order to grow. Does it really depend on that? Growth does really depend on that? Well, growth depends on investments, and this is the starting point. The problem is that there is great liquidity in the world, also in Europe. There is a surplus of liquidity, but there are no investments, because the number of investment opportunities increased, as did the investment risk. And we're going back to this globalization process that creates opportunities and risks. So we need to create the right conditions to increase the profitability of private investment. So yes, I am a supporter of public investment, but they cannot replace private investments. Public investments need to make private investments more profitable and take it forward. So this has nothing to do with national debt and deficit. Deficit is a political tool, a tool of economics. We need to understand how and why it is used. The problem of public investments in Italy is not that we do not have the necessary resources. We do have those resources, but they are not used because it is difficult to invest. So we do not need to increase the debt, even though it is a debt caused by investment. Since this debt doesn't cost too much, we could do it. But the question is why? Why don't we have these public investments? Well, there are two issues here. On the one hand, we need to change the rules. We don't have much time to do that, but last winter I had proposed, together with the Ministry of Economy and Finance, to go back to the European directive on public tenders for a period of time. That means we need to get rid of the gold plating, so to speak, this overstructure of rules that we have created around the European directive. But this is only a part of the problem. The other part of the problem is the fact that the public sector needs to be able to make plans that are adequate. So we need to improve these technical skills and these implementing skills at public level, at national level, and at local level. So this technical skill has declined and needs to be rebuilt. We have been working on this. We have created a center of a planning center, so to speak, that should be based on a principle of subsidiarity. So we have, for instance, the involvement of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti to help local and national institutions and bodies to carry on public investments. So these are two aspects that need to go hand in hand. Then the deficit problem will be tackled when we won't have any funds left. We do have the funds, but they are there. They are frozen, where they're not used. Well, something has been done this year at local level. For instance, funds were given to the municipalities, but we needed to act. We needed to act on the legal framework. So, well, the rules concerning public tenders, but we also need to, well, first you have to get there. So to get to a tender, you need to have a project. And there again, you should have a tender. So everything is blocked again. So we need to create this technical skill for public administrations to be able to act directly. Because if public administrations cannot do this kind of things, they cannot even control those who do these things. Well, this is a reform of the public administration. Well, I do not believe in big reforms. Let's focus on specific principles. One of the problems Italy has at the moment is that we need to attract investments, starting to invest in material and immaterial infrastructures, creating the right environment to attract private investments, to make them more profitable. And then the other great issue is the legal risk. Many say around the world that Italy has a lot of opportunities, but there is a high legal risk. So we need to reform that, because the legal risk is not only the slowness of bureaucratic procedures, but also the fact that the outcome is often unforeseeable, and it is quite easy in Italy to move from what are civil procedures to what are legal procedures. So this makes Italy not very attractive to foreign investors. Yes, this is one of the fundamental issues that actually disencourage foreign and international investors. But obviously, Italian investors do think the same way. They invest abroad if these problems are not solved in Italy. Another aspect that is interesting for the financial markets at the international level is the debt, the national debt. So, well, you always say that the Italian economy is solid, that the spread does not correspond to reality. If we take a look at the Italian balance, there is always a primary surplus. So, but then we have to look at the interest we have to pay for the debt, for the public debt. So the public debt is there. So can we actually hope in a decrease of the debt? All the spending review efforts have now stopped. Is there hope, or will future generation have to deal with that? No, there is hope. Our debt in terms of GDP percentage is very high, but it has been quite stable in recent years, even though there were some difficulties. But we now have the trust of the international market, and the public accounts are in order. And since, well, we have a primary surplus, we've been having that for 20 years. That means that the financial situation is, in a way, stable. So we need to have a slow decrease of the debt. So, well, that depends on growth rate, interest rate paid on the debt, and it depends on the stock. So in the world, the interest rate is less than the growth rate. Now we are living through a period of economic recession, but in Italy we do not have this situation where the growth rate is higher than the average interest rate. Debt goes down, but we can actually make it stable. But we need to start growing, but we cannot do it by creating new debt. We can do that by solving the problems I have mentioned, together with many others that I cannot mention here at the moment. So, well, the issue of the deficit is not something that cannot be faced. Has to be seen as a tool. It's not obviously a goal, an objective, as it might seem sometime. We need to understand when it is advisable to have a deficit or not. For instance, a household can have a debt to buy a house, but not to pay rent on a house. It can do that for 1 month or 2 months, but they cannot think to have a rent that is higher than what they can afford. So the decisions that are taken on the debt are not unilateral. Deficit and debt means that on the one hand, there is someone who owes money and there is someone who has to receive money. So there must be someone who's ready to lend money at acceptable conditions, but there needs to be trust. Thanks to a cautious policy in terms of economic balance, we do have this trust at the moment, but the debt we ask for has to be used in a targeted way and not to finance current expenses, because it is very difficult to find a bank that would finance the monthly rent of a house. So this is how you manage to convince the European Commission against the infraction procedure. Well, these were not arguments, actually, these were facts. This year we approved measures decided by the government. Some are, some agree with these measures, some don't. Anyway, at the same time, we maintained our accounts in order in a year of stagnation, and for the first time, after many years, there has been the first adjustment on the balance structure, and we actually managed to gain the trust of the market. With our 10-year debt, we have an interest rate of 1.5, more or less. But that means that this is a very low rate, even though it is higher than that of other countries in Europe. So now we can actually face our financial policy without too many problems, although we do have some obstacles to overcome and difficult decisions to take. Well, at the moment, you're preparing the financial law, which is extremely important because of some issues which we'll maybe deal with later. But we are in a phase of transition. The government is in crisis, so you are preparing a law, but we do not know what will happen in terms of approval, in terms of parliamentary debate. So apart from these questions, what are the elements that should be included in this law? Well, first of all, we have been thinking about measures in the Ministry of Treasury with the vice ministers, together with the two political parties. We have worked together to understand what are the different pieces. The Parliament asked to pursue the objectives in terms of public balance, and the Parliament asked also to avoid an increase in the VAT. The increase in VAT was decided to cover some expenses. So in 2011, the expenses for the year 2019, actually, and 2020. So what I'm trying to say is that even in a period of stagnation, we have gained some room of maneuver from the financial point of view because the deficit is lower than we had foreseen. And then we are trying to understand what living expenses can be actually reduced in order to avoid the increase in VAT on the one hand, and on the other, trying to decrease fiscal pressure. The reduction of VAT, obviously in itself, is an easing of the fiscal pressure. And one thing is to talk about easing fiscal pressure. Another thing is to talk about the composition of this fiscal pressure, because obviously we need to have a fiscal yield in a way. So, well, that's the way we're working. And then in September, political decisions will be taken in terms of resources, because if you issue law, you just need to actually decide how to use resources. So this will be a task that will have to be carried out by the political forces that will be at the government at the end of September. And we don't know at the moment who that will be. So this is the situation. So everything can be actually done. I don't think there are problems. Or rather, I wouldn't say that we have to be pessimistic. There were laws that were even stricter in the past, and the decisions of the deficit level will have to be taken into account the economic situation at the end of September, which is not good, and everybody knows that. But it's a situation where Germany is at the beginning of a period of recession. There is a slowing down in the whole of Europe. Italy experienced the same shock that was experienced by Germany. So we are almost at a level of stagnation, and it is difficult to have a positive trend. But we didn't have a negative trend either. So, well, the Italian economy showed a certain resilience in front of these shocks, with growth rate that was 1% lower than that of Europe, 10% lower than Germany, even though now this gap is much smaller. We are around 0 at the moment. So, well, it is not an endogenous recession. When the world and Europe are in crisis, well, Italy is not an island, obviously, but we are resisting. We are trying to use our resources, and we are targeting at the necessary reforms, and we are making investments. So we would like to take away the safeguard clause that would ask for 23 billion in VAT. So what I would say is that we need to ease the fiscal pressure. So let's talk about a reduction in fiscal pressure. So I'm talking to the minister, but I'm talking to the professor as well. The composition, as you said, of the fiscal system is important. There are direct taxes and indirect taxes. Many economists say that it is better to reduce direct taxes and increase indirect taxes. Yes, I do think it is advisable. The choices in terms of fiscal policies is a political choice in itself. So, from the point of from the technical or scientific point of view, I think that it is clear at the moment that it would be better to reduce income taxes that can take up different forms. So what can be also financed through indirect taxes. So that means that the fiscal pressure should be moved from people onto things. So that means that we can have the so-called fiscal devaluation, and we can take the fiscal burden from what is, for instance, the cost of production. Well, I do not think that the increase in VAT would have an impact on consumption. This depends on the fact that this increase is matched by a reduction in other taxes. I do not think that this can have an inflation-causing consequence, because we and the European Central Bank is trying to have this kind of impact that would favor economy. We talked about different problems that are domestic problems, but then there is also the international situation where all of a sudden a commercial war broke out. We talk about duties, we talk about protectionism. So what are the effects of this kind of situation on the Italian economic system? Well, the impact is strong because it's an impact on Italy, but also on the global economy, and on the European economy, and then on the Italian economy, because we are not only talking about trade duties, we are talking about, in a way, a form of return protectionism. It is a trade war on technology that is jeopardizing the so-called global value chains. That means, and we're going back to what we said before about globalization, if I have an investment project, I know that the intermediate elements can be bought everywhere in the world. So if we jeopardize these value chains that are at the basis of the global economy and of the growth of productivity, we also discontinue, well, or rather, we actually interrupt investment plans. So we create uncertainty that has repercussions on investment plans, which brings to a slowing down of the global economy, of a European economy and Italian economy. Now, obviously, the world changes in the face of these situations, so there is a rapid change also in those growth and developments like that of Germany, based only on exportation. That can be only temporary, because there can't be a country that is always has a surplus. So this is an issue that is very actual, very topical today. And last autumn, at the meetings of the G20 of the International Monetary Fund, we talked about a fiscal caution, and then in the winter and then in the spring, we started talking about the risks of an economic crisis, how to support the economy. At the last G7 meeting, the governors of the big central banks, well, announced expansive monetary policies and asked for balanced policies that could help their monetary policies. So this same debate is taking place in Europe at the moment. So the Italian problem is to take part into this dialogue, into this discussion, because industrial policies, economic policies, competition policies, investment policies are undergoing some changes at European level in the same direction that we have been following for many years. So that's where we have to be present. So I believe that it is useless to talk about levels of deficit in advance. The discussion that is changing, the problem of fixing the deficit depends on the reaction of financial markets, those who have to lend the money, and our need for this money and how we can use these additional resources. But all this has to be discussed on a wider background. The world is changing, Europe is changing, and we cannot ignore that. We cannot carry on the same discussions we were making 1 year ago, because the forecasts are negative and ideas are changing. So now, well, you know the European situation very well. These international pressure is bound to lead to a further cohesion or disgregation. Well, this is a difficult question. My experience, which is not too long, obviously, tells me, well, that I've seen a process of disgregation of Europe that does not depend on the Italian situation. Some European EU member states do not want to carry on the integration process. And there are some national policies that in some way make it impossible in practice to promote European policies that are sustained or supported by Italy, by France, but also by Germany at the moment, because Germany is now thinking that we have to think European. We have to go beyond national economies. So this is something new. I often say that those who are in favor of a sovereign policy are the countries of the north of Europe, not the countries of the Mediterranean. So as I was saying, what happens in the world and what happens then in Europe as a consequence brings about new ideas and changes some situations. And I do believe that it would be possible to recreate European policies starting from the investment policies and balance policies. We need to be cautious. This is obvious. I've always been convinced that we need to go beyond the fear of the expenses for investments at the European level, but this has to be done in a responsible way. Some words were used recently that are not appropriate with reference to the economic maneuvers. Some said they were brave or less brave. Well, I believe that being brave is good, but that means that one is ready to take a risk. And this is a value. This is a positive characteristic of entrepreneurs who risk their own money, their own capital. Whereas in the public sector, I think it is not appropriate to use the adjective brave because, well, it's easy to be brave with someone else's money. Maybe we need to be more responsible in using other people's money.
Un'ultima domanda.
One last question. It is about the way we communicate and we talk about these subjects. The economy has a great impact on the social life of a country, and these subjects are not easy to understand. Sometimes the complexity is reduced to 1, 2 notions that are very, very simplified. How can we get to a real communication? Before, we said that there's a big difference between what is perceived and what really happens. So I'm aware there's no magic solution here, but there must be a way to better understand the complexity of all the subjects that we have discussed this evening. Indeed, there is a big issue with perception. It is easy to convey some narratives on things that do not exist, for example. If somebody says, well, Minister Giovanni Tria states this, and if I do not react immediately, this becomes a truth. Maybe I've never said that. Maybe I've never mentioned that. Nobody will ever find a declaration that I might have made on the level of deficit. There are some objective facts, but we've never discussed this. But this is not just about me. This is in general. It is a complex issue, and I do not have a solution. And I'm a little bit old. I'm not a social media user, and I'm more used to working with the old-fashioned methodologies, also at an academic level, and I admit this. But I believe that this must be considered. I attended a conference about leadership some time ago, and on the relation between leaders and people. I got there late, and I was asked to mention a couple of things, and I just said this. And the problem is that now the elite has nothing to say, and they're not finding solutions. So we have to find solutions for a world that has changed. One problem is this. Thank you. Thank you, Minister. I believe that you contributed to clarifying many difficult subjects, and I want to thank Fabrizio Palermo and Alberto Brugnoli once again. And I wish you all a lovely evening and all the best for the meeting. And I also want to remind you that the meeting itself has its balance sheet with resources that come and go. So if you want to help the meeting to prosper and to help the cultural life and social life of this country, wherever you find a red heart, you can make a donation. Thank you so much and have a nice evening.